All right. We'll be sharing that link around. Feel free to share it as well. And yeah, guys, welcome in. Glad to see a lot of familiar faces and some new faces. So why don't we start with some brief intros for those of you who are new to the chain abstraction landscape in our community as well as here. Let's start with you, Ankit, and then move to Britt and Griffin, and then keep going down the line. Welcome.
Hi, hello everyone. My name is Ankit. I have been in the crypto blockchain space since 2017. Before that, I was an aerospace engineer. I did my master's, my PhD in aerospace engineering, found crypto in 2017, got very excited, fell down the rabbit hole, never came back, and did a bunch of stuff in between 2017 and here. Ended up in Coinbase for almost 3 years, was doing a lot of backend, smart contracts, MPC wallets, staking, and then left Coinbase almost 1.5 years ago and joined Frontier. I lead research over here, and what we basically do is basically analyze the transaction supply chain. So from the moment a user signs a transaction till the moment that transaction lands on chain, whatever hoops the transaction passes through in between, we analyze that, we write about it, we figure out what incentives are, what are the different players, and we talk about it within the community. That's my intro.
Awesome. Welcome in.
Awesome. I'm Britt. I am with Across, and I've been in the space since about 2019, I think. I came in through the community front door to the Risk Labs team. I've been working on both UMA and Across since then. And for anybody who might not know, Across is a token bridge between chains. And our little shtick is that we're the cheapest and fastest bridge out there.
Awesome. Griffin.
Hey, everybody. Pleasure to be here. Quick background on myself. So I got into crypto back in 2017 as well. I got in through the lens of crypto gaming, actually. I built a pretty simple on-chain game leveraging the Foursquare API and some simple smart contracts on Ethereum. Then for my background beyond that, so I studied computer science at Stanford. My academic research was actually embedded operating systems, so worked a little bit at the hardware software interface, building bare metal OS for like ARM chips, essentially. During my time, I also did get into cryptography and did zero knowledge protocol research first before getting into the chain abstraction landscape. So I actually worked at the intersection of DAO treasuries and sort of proof mechanisms. How do you keep pooled money private was essentially the problem for those who remember Constitution DAO and getting outbid narrowly by a hedge fund billionaire. That was one of the problems I tackled while in school. And then founded the company actually and left early and have been working on Halliday for over 2 years.
Sweet. And Tabasco and then Arjun, and we can kick off.
Yeah, for sure. Sounds good. Yeah, so a quick background from my side. My name is Tabasco, although my real name is Ethan, and I do developer relations at Particle Network. So I handle all of our developer content, all of our kind of externally facing stuff. And I guess like a little bit of background myself, and then I can kind of quickly intro Particle. So I've been in the space now for roughly 4 years or so. I kind of started as an independent developer where I built a few different applications and kind of things for the community that ended up getting a decent amount of traction, which ended up leading me into doing developer relations at an RPC provider and doing that for roughly a year and a half. Then I joined Particle Network at this point about a year ago. So at Particle, we've kind of always been focused on UX solutions, so things that kind of improve core crypto UX and kind of allow users to onboard in the space and start using applications in a way that's just a little bit easier. So our history has kind of been rooted in social logins and NPC-based wallets and stuff like this. And then in like last year, we shifted the focus quite a bit to account abstraction, and we became like one of the largest account abstraction providers in the ecosystem just by like volume of user operations and stuff like this, which we're pretty happy about. And then this year we wanted to kind of take this technology and kind of what we believe to be the next step of like all these different UX facing things, which is which is chain abstraction. And we're doing this through the means of kind of what we call account level chain abstraction. So we kind of take a unique approach to it, but I assume we'll kind of go deeper into this. But yeah, this is kind of what we do at Particle, a brief intro, and looking forward to this conversation.
Awesome. I'm Arjun. I'm one of the founders of Connext. I got my start in this space back in 2016. I was studying physics and interested in a kind of broader range of topics related to like theoretical physics. Decided that I wanted to work on something that would be, approachable to more people. I don't know how I ended up here. Shortly after joining this space, became really interested in like solving a lot of problems associated with like infrastructure and user experience. I was like a big believer in the ability to build like public goods on top of blockchains, and so started Connext in 2017 with a very simple mission: figure out how to. We were actually one of the first projects to say this, but now it's kind of cringy. But basically, figure out how to bring Ethereum to 1 billion users. Figure out how to actually make this ecosystem work. And I think pretty quickly that led us to becoming very deeply involved in scalability research. We built one of the first L2s on Ethereum in 2018. And then as kind of time went on, we saw that there was this we saw the kind of expansion of the role of thesis, and we saw that there was this like shared problem that all rollups had around interop. And so in 2020, we made the kind of jump to focusing full time on interoperability and going from being this like largely research oriented organization to becoming like an actual protocol. We were really, really fortunate that we ended up building one of the first like intent-based interoperability protocols back in 2020. And then like that kind of expanded to include any kind of like arbitrary cross-chain intent. At the time, we didn't really have the language to even describe this. And so it's really cool to see the way that the space has evolved and the direction that we're all headed now. And then since then, our focus has been on figuring out, so we sort of saw like a host of problems associated with intents and scaling intents starting from 2021. And so like our focus has been on figuring out how can we solve those problems to get to the point where like anyone can run a solver, to the point where you can run intent-based protocols on any chain for any ecosystem, for any application. And that's kind of where we are today. And like Ethan, I think we have some exciting stuff there that we're working on that I'm sure we'll get into over the course of this discussion.
Let's get into it. Awesome. Well, thanks all for coming. I think to start off, everyone here is part of the Cake Working Group. Ankit, you guys at Frontier Research have put together this cake idea to sort of illustrate the landscape of chain abstraction nowadays. Could you just kind of take us at a high level through what Cake is, and then we can dive into some of its components?
Yeah, I can like give a brief overview of I can talk about like 3 main things: what is chain abstraction, why is it necessary, and then what is Cake, and what are we trying to portray. And so chain abstraction, I think for some of the first instances I saw the word chain abstraction used was in Connext docs. And the idea is basically users should not care what chain they're on, and it should just be seamless. Similar to how when you use Web2, you do not care if the application that you are interacting with, does it live on Google Cloud or AWS or Azure. You just interact with the application on the UI. The user should not care about like if the application that they're interacting with is on Optimism or Ethereum or Cosmos or whatever. So that idea has been around for some time. I think this is the right time to basically explore that idea, because at this point of time, what you have is you have like this abundance of block space. You can literally one click deploy. You can go to Conduit, or you can go to other rollup as a service providers. You can literally one click deploy, launch a new rollup. And so block space is basically abundant. The usage of block space is what is scarce now. And so what you need to do right now is basically resolve the UX problem. That is what the bottleneck is. And right now what you're doing, what all the users are doing is basically they're holding in their mind like these different, where they hold these different states. And they're trying to basically, before they do any operation, they try to collect all these states, send them to a particular chain, a particular destination, and then do whatever they want to do. It's a very buggy experience. You basically are asking the user to run like some process in their head, do all the operations, wait for 10 minutes, spend tens of dollars before you can actually do the thing that you want to do with the blockchain. You still have a lot of activity on all these different rollups, because this just shows like how powerful financial incentives are. But the UX is very, very buggy today. And so if you want to bring the next 1 billion set of users, you need to smoothen all that away from the users. Maybe the current set of users care very, very deeply about what are the individual properties of all the different rollups that they're interacting with. But chain abstraction basically believes that it's an app decision. The users should not care about it. And so when you bring in the next set of users, maybe they do not care about those properties that much. And so that all that should be abstracted away. And so this is what chain abstraction is all about. This is what why is it necessary? When we were basically writing the cake, we saw like there are many different ways people are trying to solve the cross-chain problem. But at the end of the day, there are basically 4 layers that all these applications are interacting with or are at some location or the other in the cake framework. So you have the application layer. These are things like Uniswap, 1inch, where the user interacts with them on the front end via some front end. You have the permissioning layer. This is the wallet, and this is what the users gives permission to do something by initiating transactions. You have the solver layer. This is like a new layer that has emerged due to the MEV properties, due to like it being very painful to basically get your transaction included, and all the searchers evolved, all the market makers evolved. And so you have the solver layer, which basically tries to solve the routing problem of somehow finding the best route and making sure that the transaction lands on chain. And then finally, you have the settlement layer, which is like all these different chains, all these different oracles, which do not care about routing or risk so much. They care more about like settlement and finality and making sure that things are fraud proof. So these are the 4 different layers. Each of these layers have different trade-offs that they need to care about. So in permission layer, you care about like UX versus agency. So users might want more agency. So like I personally read the hash that my hardware wallet generates, but there are other users who just use Telegram bots and they click. And so there's a wide range of users in crypto. And so that's what you're trying to do on the permission layer. On the solver layer, you're trying to find the perfect route based on what the user wants to do. And on the settlement layer, you're basically trying to settle things in a fraud-proof manner as quickly as possible. Yep.
I commend you for reading the transaction hash on your wallet every time you submit a transaction. It's quite a feat.
Sometimes.
Sometimes. Cool. Yeah, very, very helpful explanation and layout of the chain abstraction space. And so the main takeaways that I have here, I'm just going to keep it very high level, which is that we have these 4 components that make up the chain abstraction space. We have the application layer. This is the Uniswap, the 1inch that users interact with. We have the permissioning layer. This is the wallet or the account layer that users, again, interact with, but to instruct the applications. And then we have the solvers that are looking to fulfill each of those intents submitted by the user, and then settlement where it all sort of lands. And so I just want to go around the horn again and give everyone a chance to sort of give like their positioning here. You know, where are you guys? Are you at the application level, or are you at the account level, or solver or settlement? And then sort of like, you know, why you guys have chosen to participate in this cake working group to ultimately bring about the best chain abstraction user experience to onboard 1 billion users. Britt, do you want to start with across and maybe touch on the intent standard that you guys have going on with Uniswap?
Yeah, sure. Happy to. So in terms of like where we sit in that stack, we don't fit neatly into just one layer. We're up to stuff in each of those layers a little bit, and not so much on the like the wallet layer, but across V3, when we launched that, we released Across Plus, which allows dApps to build on top of Across. So we're like building dApp tools to help with the chain abstraction. We also released Across Settlements, which is that base layer, that settlement layer, the mechanism that we have there. And then that kind of relies on our network of relayers or solvers, whatever you want to call it. There's 100 names for that, but we call them relayers. And then we, of course, like maintain our bridged dApp. So we're at the dApp layer as well. And in terms of the standard, yeah, we recently just put out a standard on cross-chain intents with Uniswap. And the idea behind that is if we can get dApps that are building these like RFQ mechanisms to adopt this standard, it would allow a network of solvers to plug into all of these different dApps more easily without, the excessive burden on making big adaptations for each different use case, they would all be kind of like reading the same transaction type or messaging, basically. So yeah, pretty excited about that.
Arjun, you have anything to add there?
Nothing to add specifically. I mean, I can go if that's helpful, but or we can keep going down the line.
Yeah, go ahead. I just thought that you may have something to add there with the cross-chain standards. I'm just kind of picking on you because of XERC20, but
Yeah.
feel free to be as diplomatic as you like.
I mean, no need for diplomacy. Like I am a huge supporter of the Cross and Uniswap's work. I think there's a big need for it. I think that if we can find better ways to standardize around what these interfaces look like, we can promote better competition from the get-go and avoid the shit show that was like the cross-chain ecosystem. And so yeah, I'm like strongly in favor of that, as well as any other standards that help like maintain decentralization, help maintain like openness. But I would say there's a challenge with like the across the Uniswap standard, and like I've spoken to both Hart and then members of the Uniswap team about it, which is that it is like purpose built for like trading and limit orders, and like to figuring out how to expand that out. Like if we want to get the most bang for its buck, then ideally we should try to figure out how to expand that out to like other kinds of intents as well. But I think that's something that is like that is just part of like an ongoing discussion that we'll all have about it.
Yeah, and I just really want to say like no shade on XERC20. We're a fan of what they're doing with Connext as well, so want to keep that friendly vibe. And
both of these things are needed no matter what. Like there's no way that intents are going to work for every long tail asset, and like there's no way that XERC20 is not going to work for like ETH or USDC or any other major asset.
Yeah, it's different use cases, right? Like there's no perfect solution for everything. You just have to figure out the best combination to fulfill the largest set of needs out there.
Love it. Good vibes all around. Okay, so this is on the bridging and sort of like the intent application solver, touching a few different areas there. Tabasco, you guys are working on the account level, more of like the wallet layer. Could you kind of like explain how you guys are approaching chain abstraction and how you guys might work together with like across and the Uniswap standard as well as XERC20?
Yeah, definitely. I think maybe for some context, we've been thinking at Particle a lot about like how you can, I guess, understand like logically the chain abstraction landscape. Because I think one of the big problems recently within like the whole chain abstraction vertical is that we've had the Cake framework, which I think is like one of the main like foundations that really kicked off a lot of the recent activity within the chain abstraction landscape, and a lot of projects that have popped up in terms of like inspiration from the Cake framework. And of course, huge props to Connext for kind of kicking off with the term of chain abstraction. So I think like there's been a lot of growth in this vertical recently, and at Particle we've been trying to find ways to like better, I guess, articulate the landscape and the projects that are built within it. So like based on the Cake framework and kind of the granularity of the Cake framework, we actually recently published an article with Agoric where we kind of proposed a way of looking at it that kind of looks at the landscape from a maybe higher level. So from a broader perspective, and specifically at those that are within the chain abstraction landscape, so those that are specifically building for chain abstraction. So we kind of look at this as chain abstraction solutions kind of existing at three relatively simple levels, like one being the blockchain level. So you can think like a Polygon ag layer, or even like Optimism superchain to some degree, things that sort of create these chain collectives with like shared security, shared bridging standards, stuff like this. Then you have the application level, which is solutions that are specifically targeting application developers, so developers that are building applications that can leverage solutions to actually create what you might consider like a chain abstracted experience within the confines of a given application. We consider this to be like Agoric, even Skip to some degree, and I think Connext kind of falls within that to some degree, which is like kind of providing developers with the tooling to actually build applications that are basically removed from the confines of a single chain and have the ability to aggregate balances across chains and stuff like this. Then where we sit is kind of on the account level. And there's been a lot of work on the account level recently. So you have us, you have Near is also kind of generally considered on the account level, at least from our perspective. Even like One Balance, which is kind of something that Frontier Research recently announced. We also consider this to kind of be also on the account level, which is chain abstraction, but applied to basically, in this case, account. So on our side, we kind of take this perspective from the smart account side. So we have this standard called, or not standard, but like this technology called universal accounts, which essentially exists to kind of provide users with a very easy, like a universally reproducible mechanism of having one balance that can span every chain. So I know like a lot of the chain abstraction work that happens today is like, well, how do you give users a balance they can use anywhere? So we think some of this can be applied at the account level to a somewhat broader degree. So like basically just giving users access to their funds across all chains is one thing. So we kind of see chain abstraction as a whole as generally being a combination of, at its foundation, an account level solution. So something like our universal accounts or even nearest chain signatures or something of this nature, and also an application level solution. So we think that like what is a like true chain abstraction experience is something that really does break the kind of confines of chains and isn't really restricted to, for example, what developers can interact with on the application level, and also how users can interact with the entire ecosystem from like a more standardized perspective. So like having my account, I can go to 100 different applications and use the same account, use the same balance without the developer necessarily needing to integrate a specific SDK. That's important. And then also applications need to have the ability to take this to a more granular degree and actually create advanced workflows across chains in a way that also can kind of take advantage of solutions like this. Like I think, for example, we've been doing a lot of work with like Agorix orchestration. I'm doing a lot of research into Connext recently, among a few other solutions that have kind of been centered around this application level. And we believe that this future where you have an account level solution that kind of exists, it's pretty widespread, whether it's like some sort of standardized mechanism or, for example, universal accounts from Particle or something like this, in combination with applications that kind of buy into this philosophy of chain abstraction and adopt solutions that are geared around improving the experience on the application level and actually breaking them from these kind of confines, or I guess breaking them from these chains. We believe that this is kind of the future that we're headed towards, and hopefully at Particle we're trying to build towards this at the account level. So we kind of see ourselves at a very specific position in the space, which is kind of contributing with universal accounts, which what we want to see is this adopted alongside a number of other chain abstraction solutions, specifically those that exist at the application level and even potentially at the blockchain level. So this is kind of like the perspective that we take on the chain abstraction space and how we're kind of positioning ourselves within it.
Awesome, guys. Yeah, Arjun, please.
Well, I think Griffin also has to go, but I can give a quick summary of where we're at as well, because I think one of the challenges in the space is that it's evolving so quickly that, like, definitionally in the past it was less of a chain abstraction stack, and it was more like, oh, you were building a vertically integrated chain abstraction product. And so that's why, for example, today, like, we in Across compete because we have competing bridges and we have competing intent networks, but does that necessarily need to be the case forever? I don't know. I don't think so. For Connext, today, I think very similar to Across, we have, we don't neatly fit into one part of the stack. We have like the bridge UI that people use to bridge with. We have like an underlying developer platform that people build applications with. And then we have this like intent network directly that we distribute. And then underneath the hood, we have like a mechanism for like settling intents and things like that. For us, what we've realized is there's actually one piece of this puzzle. So the main reason we have all of these pieces is because, to be honest, until now, nothing really existed, right? Like, we needed to make sure, like, you kind of have to build the whole stack yourself if there's not anything else. But there's one part of this, one problem here that we've been really very like obsessively focused on now for years, which is in 2021, we saw this like really troubling thing when we had a bunch of, I think we had like 30 to 50 different intent solvers in our ecosystem, about $30 to $50 million in TVL. We saw this really troubling thing where we found that of all of the 30 to 50 intent solvers, maybe 5 to 10% were actually like actually doing anything. And we double clicked on why. We realized that it's because when you're kind of doing intents across chains, your liquidity ends up kind of moving around. And if you don't actively manage that liquidity, if you're not actively like rebalancing and managing your inventory, it ends up usually on chains where it's not really going to get utilized. And so we found that there's this like critical underlying problem associated with intents and with chain abstraction, that where unless we're able to kind of solve for how solvers can like be more passive, how solvers can not have to be like very explicitly like agents with explicit expertise, like folks like Wintermute who have hundreds of millions of dollars of capital and like can build in-house aggregators and run operational teams. Like, how can we make solving open to more people aside from that? That's been the core problem that Connext has really been prioritizing over the course of the last few years. And I think we're maybe about like 10 to 14 days away from doing some announcements associated to that. But I would say like the direction that we're headed is focusing on that piece of the stack. So everything that happens, I guess, in the cake framework, everything that happens between the solver layer and the settlement layer.
Feel the alpha coming. Awesome. Yeah, stoked to hear those announcements. Griffin, last but not least, please cap us off, and then for the rest of this, everyone feel free to just chime in and kind of go back and forth without any prompting questions. We want to make it like more of a workshop. But before we get into that, Griffin, please.
Yeah, thank you. Happy to talk about where we sit in the stack. Yeah, we're not neatly positioned to any of the sort of horizontal layers. We sit at the intersection of two. Specifically, we are at the account and solver layer, and I can sort of speak to why before saying exactly what we do. Like when I think about the problem of chain abstraction, right? Like what is driving the need for this infrastructure in the industry? It broadly, in my mind, is a function of sharding or sharding out execution onto multiple state machines, right? We wouldn't be having this discussion if we were all on Ethereum L1. And now we have a bunch of different execution threads on L2, on L3. And I think the reason this industry exists is what do we lose when that happens? Well, you lose atomic composability. So I think everybody here in some sense is working towards solving the problem of bringing composability back to the blockchain. But there's one really big problem, which is how do you actually bring composability to a system that is no longer synchronous? You're not on the same sort of absolutely ordered blockchain. And then this is sort of where my operating systems background comes in. I'm like, well, asynchronous coordination at a fundamental level is a mutexing problem. This is a classic sort of distributed systems problem space. And this becomes, how do you actually coordinate a set of different computers that are no longer sharing the same, clock and ordering to execute on a common outcome? And I think there are a few approaches to this, and there's a lot of interesting work in the industry, right? I think some people are working towards solving this problem at the block builder level, right? We have protocols like Swap, and that's sort of how do you build a block across many shards so that you can coordinate on an outcome across these virtual machines. Our opinion is that you should do this at the intra-block level, that you can coordinate not building a block, but at the sort of application layer, so at the smart contract layer. And we've done this at the smart account layer. Like, why would you want to do this sort of coordination at the smart account layer? Because that is the sort of nexus point of interaction across many shards and many protocols. And we call this orchestration. Like at the end of the day, every phrasing of what we're talking about is really boiling down to coordination and orchestration of many components to fulfill user outcomes that are necessary and helpful, like pulling your balances from many different places, hitting one of many bridges, waiting, synchronizing, locking. We think about that internally as an orchestration problem. So we've built an orchestration system that is sort of directly embedded into an account that couples with a network. So basically, like when you orchestrate, you delegate some authority to a solver network that can then run these tasks, almost like task delegation to hit your outcome. And we've done this for a while in production with some large clients. And this is sort of where we want to take the space is let's embed directly into the account layer orchestration tooling, one, so that every app developer doesn't need to build a Kubernetes equivalent, because that's just absurd if every protocol is building orchestration themselves. So we think that just should just be a common service for the industry.
Sweet. Ankit, anything to add?
Just a quick overview on what is Cake Working Group. I think I missed that when I was doing like the info. I think so. Our idea of Cake Working Group was we have done 2 like real-time IRL workshops as well, where we bring in people from different parts in the Cake Working Group who are in different layers of the stack, and then just make them talk about the problems that they are trying to solve and what are the trade-off points and where they make the trade-offs in these different design decisions. And then we also have a Telegram channel where a lot of these teams come in, and then they discuss, debate, share memes, and share good cake. And so what we are trying to do with the working group is basically at least come up at one common set of language or definitions about how we speak about what we are trying to do. Because even right now, when you talk about solvers, there are 10 different ways people call solvers. And so at least come up with a single definition about what these different things are. And then once you have the definitions, once you can talk about how you define different properties of the system, you can come up to some sort of a standard. And so that is what we want to do next. And so people have been doing work on that. So Across has been doing work on that with respect to the standard they have published for cross-chain limit orders. Connext has done XERC20, but I think there's a lot more stuff to be done wherever there are these different layers that interact with each other. And so that is, so Cake Working Group is a venue to basically do that.
Yeah, and I mean, you raised a couple of good points there, which I think that yeah, for the second half of this call, would like to kind of more so focus on where you kind of speak about how these all kind of come together in the terminologies, but also in kind of practical implementations, and coming from the perspective that Tabasco brought with the three kind of layers of chain abstraction as we know it today. I think that's a common thread that people are still like associating chain abstraction as just one thing, like it's just like one idea, and not really breaking it down into like each part. So I guess I'll pose like kind of an open question, which is like in a world where there was multiple of these parts put together, like what would this look like from like a user perspective, or like how would this kind of actually like go like integrate, like how do these solutions kind of come together?
Yeah. I guess sorry, go ahead. You're good.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to kind of quickly, I guess, chime in on my side from this. I think that this is quite an interesting problem. And, at least when we started kind of getting in the chain abstraction space, which, at this point was, I guess, around 5-6 months ago at this point. One thing that we noticed was that a lot of sentiment, like you mentioned, was that chain abstraction was sort of a monolith almost, that it was actually like one thing that somebody would do someday, and that this would be like the end all be all of chain abstraction. But like honestly, one of the main points of rhetoric that we've been like trying to hammer in through all of our content and everything that we've been producing is like chain abstraction is actually the opposite of this. I mean, it's a stack of products. I think the Cake Farmer did a very good job of kind of like starting to shift the sentiment around this, and we've been trying to reinforce this a lot through our content. And that like what really will, at least from our perspective, achieve chain abstraction is ultimately a number of interoperable solutions that exist at different points in a stack that will collectively achieve this kind of ideal that is chain abstraction. And actually what we're doing right now is that we even believe that like chain abstraction as a term is too broad and too there's not enough social consensus around chain abstraction. Like what does this actually mean? Because one of the biggest, like, I guess not arguments, but conversations on Twitter recently have been like, what are the relationship between intents and chain abstraction? Is like, and like, how do these things actually like is intents like a means of achieving chain abstraction? Is chain abstraction a product of intent? Like, so like the semantics of everything have been very unclear up to this point. So like we believe that, like, I mean, first and foremost, there needs to be an actual formal definition of what chain abstraction is, and of course how it relates to these different technologies, which I think starting from the Cake framework and kind of some other mental models that have been produced recently, we're trying to kind of ease the entry into, at least from our perspective. I think that this kind of goes pretty hand in hand with this vision that, like, at least from a developer perspective, what I personally see is that like chain abstraction will kind of be an application specific type of implementation. And like, of course, there's probably going to be some standards. I think there's going to be some bridging standards, some cross-chain intent standards, some things that will be quite important towards making this more streamlined. But I think ultimately the actual solutions that users will use are going to be relatively modular, especially on the application level. So for example, what type of SDK or API does a developer want to use for, I guess, like the way that we see the term like orchestration is usually kind of like a developer actually facilitating cross-chain transactions or something of this nature. So like, how would they actually achieve this on the application level? I think this will continue to remain like it's up to the developer to choose this. So there's not going to be one solution that will kind of own this entire vertical. I think there will be standards that will kind of streamline this, but I think ultimately, like, the way in which chain abstraction will be achieved, even when you look at it as a collective of solutions, won't necessarily be, okay, here's 4 or 5 solutions that work well together, and like now we've done chain abstraction. I think it will continue to be like different solutions that are building different parts of the stack, that are improving different parts of the stack, that developers will be able to choose from, and sort of like a more modular sense of what do they want to use to enable chain abstraction within their application, and what does the ecosystem want to adopt on an account level, on a user level to achieve this as well. So I think that a very good point was made here a moment ago, which is that that the semantics of chain abstraction aren't very well defined, and ultimately there needs to be a better understanding collectively that chain abstraction is not a monolith; that it's actually instead a very collaborative and I mean, quite fundamentally ambitious approach in terms of what we want to achieve as an ecosystem. I mean, right now we're talking about removing all barriers between chains to where users, in some cases even unaware of what chains they're using. So this is a more ambitious thing than it might seem on the surface, which is why it's so important to have such a collective of solutions. So at least this is how we see it, and we've been pushing very hard on this point over the past few months.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I think you're totally right that there needs to be like better clarity around the term and around like the technology. I think that the lack of clarity comes from maybe just like the way in which, I mean, look, like when we introduced the term, we were introducing it less of as like, here is a specific prescriptive way to do things, and more of like, here's a vision for what the future should look like. And that's maybe how I personally define chain abstraction at the moment, is that it's a thesis, right? It's like the modular thesis. It's a vision for how we like the end state that we want to achieve, and that visions are fundamentally public goods, right? They're just ideas. This just represents a way to think about where we should end up, and I think that way to think about it is very specifically, users should not have to care what chain they're on. That's basically it, right? Like, if we can achieve an outcome where users don't have to care what chain they're on, then we've achieved chain abstraction. Now, how we go about doing that and the specific technology that's used is definitely an open question. And I agree. Like, I really appreciate the Cake framework specifically because it is sort of brought to light the fact that, hey, there's actually a whole ecosystem of different things that are going to be involved here that will have to work together to make this happen. This was actually like the big problem. So maybe just to take a step back, like, why did we start talking about chain abstraction last year? It was because we ran into this issue. We were probably like the first ones to be doing intents with something on the target chain, like bridging across chains, and then executing something on the target chain, which you kind of introduced back in like 2021. And we were trying to find PMF with this idea, with this product, all through like the bear market from like 2022 onwards. But we were struggling, and the reason we were struggling wasn't because users didn't want the thing that we had. They were like, yeah, I see the end state that you want to end up at. But the problem that we were having was that there was just so many other pieces that were totally tangential to the work that we were doing, associated with, okay, well, like, how are you going to abstract away the need to like switch, chains in MetaMask? Like, how are you going to get rid of gas? How are you going to get rid of all of these other things? And we realized, okay, this is just way bigger than us. Like, there's no way that we can solve all of these problems. And so what we started to do was like, we started experimenting with this idea of like, well, what if we just go and pay UX researchers to go like create public goods, like just put out public goods content and like do public good like user research to figure out what is the right way to build this stuff. And I think that idea kind of turned into this like notion of like, well, hopefully if we can inspire other people to coalesce around the same idea, then maybe we can get more people building each like individual pieces of the solution, so that there doesn't have to be one project building everything.
Yeah, I think I just want to, I guess, like highlight something that you just said about the way that you define chain abstraction. I think this is something that this week we spent hours thinking about, because we're about to produce something that kind of like tries to provide a little bit more of like a structure as to the definition. And we've been thinking a lot about like, how do you actually define chain abstraction? Like what are the actual semantics around this? And I think that you mentioned this kind of, which I believe is very important, is kind of like chain abstraction is almost, it's not like a specific like prescriptive process or technology. It's an experience. It's kind of like an ideal that is, like you mentioned, sort of this, it's an idea, it's a public good. It's not like something specific that will yield it's an intent. Yeah, exactly. It's not something that will like yield an exact technology or something that it'll be filled or solved by a collective of companies that are building different technology. So I think that like, yeah, this is very important, and this is something that we've been thinking a lot about as well, is like, how do you fit within this definition? And I think like there doesn't necessarily need to be like a super rigid like definition that everybody needs to follow to a T. It's going to coalesce in something that's more open and will change over time, I assume, as kind of like, different technologies kind of innovate different parts of the stack. But we definitely do kind of agree that the future will look like, ideally, just to kind of provide a vision maybe to bounce off of, is like the future will look like basically user going to an application, and ideally the only kind of experience that should be here is between the user and the application that they're using. There should be no understanding or kind of being mindful of the chain that they're using or anything other than their account and the application, which I think this is actually a very interesting point that Frontier Research recently made in their paper about one balance, which is this transition from a chain-centric landscape to an account-centric landscape. And I really like this terminology because I think it represents some of the philosophical shifts pretty well. But anyways, this is kind of we agree very much with kind of this idea that chain abstraction is more of an experience that will evolve over time rather than like a specific definition.
Yeah. So to answer Andy's initial question, I think like I agree that chain abstraction is a vision. It's an intent. It's how users should use crypto in a multi-chain world, in a multi-rollup world, where you're launching one new rollup every week. And so it is necessary. I also think it is inevitable because there is enough friction that is caused by hopping multiple chains and having gas in multiple chains that it is like app developers are seeing like drop in usage because like there is some friction around it. And so it is inevitable. Both users and app developers want something like this. And so what underlying technologies actually end up materializing is a game that will play out. It will be a very messy game, but we know that we cannot just solve that problem on our own. There are multiple people, several teams, people much more smarter than us who are thinking about this problem day and night. And so we just want to bring everyone in the same room and just talk about it and challenge us and correct us if we are wrong. So which is why we have taken the approach of being more open, just publishing whatever we are thinking about, and just engaging much more actively with different players in the cake layers.
So are we thinking that users really care about like what chain they're on and their trust assumptions that are with a given chain? Because I feel like I would like use pretty much any Ethereum rollup that settles to Ethereum, maybe question something if it has a smaller validator set and uses like a modular data availability layer like Celestia, Avail, etc. Maybe be like, okay, I know that. But like, I feel like outside of that, I'm not sure that I would really personally care. Like Blast, I think, is a really good example of like people just full degen over there without really like, it was a very clearly a multi-sig with like small owners, and rollups are effectively still there, and it's a whole other live stream about that. But I think like, are you guys building for users who care about where they are, or are you more so just building for like people that like the future that you think of, like you just put all these chains together in like one cluster and just assume that people don't care? Or is there kind of parameters that you can kind of play with just on how you guys are seeing the user demand from your individual products?
That's a good question. I think one thing to note is like users' preferences are a spectrum around like how comfortable they are with giving more like free-form permissions to certain set of applications. And so you have users which use Telegram bots, which generate like 20-30% of DEX order flow at this day. And it's users just fully trust the application. And you have other set of users who use hardware wallets. And so there's a spectrum of user preferences. There's also a spectrum of chain security, as you said, like you are much more comfortable being in the EVM rollup landscape and maybe a little bit near it. But if it looks like a centralized system, then maybe not. And so who makes that decision is an important thing to parameterize about. The beauty of crypto is you have this censorship resistance property of exit, so you can exit from any mechanism. And if you retain that property, you give users the ability to choose whatever type of system that they are comfortable with, wherever they lie in this UX versus agency spectrum. And I think there will be a multitude of different variations of chain abstraction stack for each and every type of user. And so it at the end of the day, it depends on the user what they want to use. And then there's like this decision on what chain to actually deploy your application on is also like a application specific decision to some point. And so if a user, like today, if a user is using Uniswap, they are trusting Uniswap smart contracts, they are trusting Uniswap front end, they are trusting Uniswap front end to make sure, thinking that okay, this front end is not hacked, or they're trusting Uniswap smart contracts that it is enough audited. So users still trusting the applications at some level. Similarly, if the chain abstraction applications are taking one more assumption, which is what chain we want to let the users interact with. It's not exactly what you want, but it's like a spectrum of things, and it should be parameterizable.
I mean, I honestly think so I think there's there's obviously like multiple categories of people here, right? Ankit is totally right. Like there is a class of people in this space, and 100% power to them. There's a reason why the space exists, but that there's a class of people in the space that are going to be like, yeah, you have to run your own nodes for everything, and you have to do everything locally. You basically fork the Uniswap interface, run the interface locally to actually interact with Uniswap, because you can't trust the hosted code. There's no way to verify it in the browser, and yeah, that's true, right? Like the moment you're using any application in the browser, like you could change the application code and like no user would ever know the difference. So there's a range. However, I would say I think people seem to really misunderstand the level of additional trust that is involved in the chain abstraction thesis versus where we are today. And I think the reason for this is that people like, I mean, you pointed this out yourself, like Blast is a really good example, right? Like we sort of have this thesis where we're like, okay, well, users will not use applications in places where they think their funds could get stolen. But then people go and ape into stuff like Blast all the time. In practice, if you're looking at like a given chain security model, right, there's actually, if you're like within a single chain, there's not really any way for your funds to get stolen. If the chain produces an invalid block, you can just like join the minority fork and then like continue on with the chain, right? There's not actually a way to like lose money there. You can always fork out through social consensus. And so I think like the cases in which those security risks actually affect users are more specifically associated with how like funds are being how these transactions are being completed across chains and how funds get settled across chains. And in that sense, the like chain abstraction intense model is strictly superior. And it's strictly superior because from the perspective of the user, their interaction is done in seconds, right? Like they're like the shorter amount of time that they're kind of waiting around for something to happen, the more likely they are at risk. With the chain abstraction model, you're like offloading all of that security risk, all of that complexity, all of the like overhead of needing to think about, how likely is it that this is potentially going to get hacked or something while I'm using it. You're offloading that all to a like sophisticated third party where they are fronting their own money to do it, and like you as a user are completely safe as soon as they've taken that action of fronting their own capital.
Yeah, I think I can add a little color on this as well. Like, I think it will be a spectrum at the end of the day, because I think different users of different applications will have a different profile of preferences. And I think a good example of how this has been handled historically when it comes to sort of web server security is actually the browser. Like if you look at, how is HTTPS handled? How are certificates handled in Chrome? For the average Chrome user, you go to a website, you click through, and you're good. However, if you really want to know, you can click at that, you can look at the certificate, you can look at the RSA signature, you can take that down, run verify yourself, go all the way up to the root of trust, look at your certificate bundle in your browser if you want to. All of that information is public and you have full access to that. So if you're really hardcore, by all means, like verify my TLS certificate on my website. And then there's also like, if you go to a website that's not HTTPS secure, you get a big warning on your browser that says, hey, stop. So I imagine we'll probably go into something like this. Like if you're running a chain and you're sending significant value to a network that, has like a 1 out of 1 consensus on like a side chain, I imagine I think most wallets at some point will say, hey, warning, are you sure about this? And then the last thing I'll say is, from the direction the industry is going, I think by the time we have billions and billions of users, I think there's going to be an enormous pressure and also sort of technological pressure for everything to be a ZK rollup at this point. Like I think very soon all these systems will be proof based. Well, not very soon, probably within a couple of years. And that sort of alleviates some of these risks beyond liveness risk, which like who can actually produce the proof. And then I think you rely on sort of UI level warnings so the user is actually aware.
I think this actually brings up a very interesting part of the conversation when it comes to chain abstraction, which I've also spent a lot of time thinking about recently, which is like, I think the chain abstraction, like was mentioned, will actually be a variety of solutions which exist on the spectrum. I think the spectrum would most likely in this conversation be defined by the degree to which they express information to the user. I think like to one part of the spectrum, there's value in like being as simple and as easy to understand as possible. Like the user doesn't even know what chain that they have their balances on. I think like this is one scenario that we'll see quite often, especially in more consumer-facing use cases like games or socialify applications. I mean, users aren't going to care necessarily, where their funds are or like what trains they're interacting with, which makes sense. But also, there's some users that will, and I think that this will do two things. Number one, different applications are going to use different solutions and different stacks of solutions. And this goes back to what I was mentioning earlier, which is that ultimately chain abstraction will be a modular stack of different account level and application level solutions, which themselves will have different levels of user perception as to what they're actually doing and where their balances are, et cetera, et cetera. That is ultimately up to the application developer to want to go ahead and integrate, right? So do they want an account level solution that is, a little bit broader, maybe works with different wallets that kind of, tries to abstract away as much as possible? Do they want like a specific wallet that maybe, has like native chain abstraction enabled? And there's some wallets that are integrating this with different solutions. So, I mean, like, the specifics here are going to deviate based upon use case. And I think this is very important that chain abstraction will be implemented to a modular degree. And I think the other part of this conversation that comes up that's quite interesting is security and how chain abstraction actually affects security. I believe I was actually before this, I saw a tweet where somebody was mentioning how they think that chain abstraction will make security harder because, of course, you're doing multiple actions for end users rather than a user just signing one action. And I think this also goes down into intents. And maybe it was Socket that quote retweeted this, or somebody did, where they said they made a good point, which is that chain abstraction actually, to some degree, makes security easier, and it actually reduces security risks because no longer is security necessarily being handled by end users specifically. It's being handled in some part by solvers, which are economically incentivized to make more secure decisions. So this is what I believe to be a very important point. And I think security is another one of the major problems that, like, from a user perspective, we haven't necessarily solved. But I actually think that chain abstraction, and to a large point, most chain abstraction solutions will actually contribute to the betterment and the resilience of security, rather than the detriment of it. So I think this is also quite an important point, from the user perception, like where they see things, and also kind of how security will be handled. So I think there's a lot of problems being solved here. But this is just one point I wanted to make.
Love that take. Yeah, I think I tend to agree. That's very important as well. Arjun, I saw you kind of pointing your finger up in the air as like a +1. And in these last few minutes, just want to go around.
I think that was my tweet.
Oh, nice. Cool. Well, yeah, I mean, just to go around and kind of, as we wrap up, get some closing thoughts. This has been an awesome panel. And so, Arjun, since that was your tweet, if you want to start with your closing thoughts, and we'll go around and hear from everyone.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I guess from my side, I'm super excited by where the space is right now. I think, there's a lot of like questions right now around like, how does chain abstraction differ from the cross-chain thesis? I've done a little bit of tweeting around that, and I want to like work to within the Cake working group to like consolidate around like what the chain abstraction thesis specifically is and why it's different from cross-chain. And I think that there's, I think a big part of why it's different is, or a big part of what feels different is also that there's much better delineation of responsibility, and there's a much better, like, clearer answers to like how you can get a bunch of like a broad ecosystem of different projects to work on a shared set of problems to create something that's just a lot bigger than any individual project. For me, that's what I find most exciting about this, is that like, I think this is such a big open problem that like any project that kind of gets involved at this stage to kind of help like mark out what this ecosystem will look like is going to be enormously successful, and is also going to be contributing to be building like the future of the internet. Like, I think this is going to have like actual historical significance. So yeah, I'm really happy and like grateful to be on both this call and also building alongside a bunch of people that are doing some really cool stuff here. Aside from that, I would say the only other closing thought on my side is, as I mentioned earlier in this call, like Connext is heading in a new and really exciting direction here, where we want to try to like work with everybody that's operating the chain abstraction space and help this space accelerate and succeed as best as possible, and in particular do that by decentralizing solvers, which we think is like perhaps one of the biggest open problems remaining. And so if you're a listener, if you're on this call, I want to talk to you about it. And if you're a listener, I definitely follow like the Connext Twitter over the course of the next couple of weeks, so you can hear more about it.
Awesome. Yeah, decentralization and permissionlessness of that solver network, so that Wintermute and the rest of the market makers don't just monopolize it all. And as far as the working together with the people on the call, either we'll organize a group chat, or maybe Ankit and the working group can expose a Telegram invite link, and we'll get more people into that group if you aren't already in there. And so yeah, just to close out, anyone else closing thoughts? It's been a tremendous space, so open floor for anyone who's got something to add.
Yeah, I've got some thoughts on this. Like when I think about chain abstraction, the reason I think this is a very good signal for Ethereum in particular is that, to me, the problems we are facing are an indicator of scale. Like in not too many words, like the problems we're solving have largely been solved before in the context of other computer systems, of other distributed systems. And I think what we're coming to, like the conclusion we've come to as an industry, right, is you can't run the world computer on a single machine, right? A blockchain is a single threaded computer that's about as powerful as a calculator from the 80s or 90s, right? If you expect to get 1 billion people on that, good luck. Like Google, right? They're running billions of containers in highly optimized data centers on like an x86 instruction set. Ethereum is not an efficient virtual machine by any means. So we've recognized you need concurrency, you need L2s, you need orbits, you need superchain, hyperchain, subnets. Like every major foundation has said we need to scale out as horizontal as we can possibly go. And the second you do that, like we're no longer in vertically integrated land. We're in distributed systems land, and that's a whole class of problems, and that's a very rich and deep part of computer science, really. But you only get to like tackle those problems if you have scale. And like it would have been premature to do this 3 years ago. Like there would have been absolutely no need to think about these abstractions like orchestration, coordination, intent-based bridging. But now we're there, and that's a sign of maturity in the industry. And that's why I think that's like the fact that Ethereum is really like one of the only ecosystems to be here too. It is a very important thing to realize too, that this is a mature ecosystem in the market to be thinking about this class of computing problems, because this was only really thought about when Web2 companies really scaled beyond running like a server on one instance, and they started having their own server farms and clusters.
Yeah, I think that aligns with the general idea of the modular thesis as well. Tabasco.
Yeah. I guess just a quick closing thought from my side. First of all, I think what Griffin just said is absolutely true, and I think that was quite a good take, especially when it comes to the kind of maturity of the ecosystem, and the fact that we're now thinking about these technologies. I think is a good indicator of that. Particle Weave, kind of the whole reason why we got into chain abstraction this year, and why we wanted to really focus all of our engineering resources on achieving this at the account level through universal accounts, is because we've been building a kind of abstraction stuff and social login into the space for multiple years now, and what we realize is that like the tooling is here now. Like you can create a pretty killer experience within the silo of one application. I even know that like for example, Halliday with some of their existing products has like done some pretty cool work in this regard in terms of different games and so on. And there's a lot of other kind of products that have built some some pretty wild experiences in the silo of one application. Now I think really what we found was that once you move outside of the silo of one application and start doing things across the ecosystem, which really, I mean, the goal is that users will be able to leverage their accounts across chains, across applications. This is really where the experience starts breaking down. And I think that we've seen onboarding in isolation, but really, I hate using the word mass adoption or like mass onboarding or anything like this, but I think like, getting retail users into the space will happen on an ecosystem level. And this is really where chain abstraction comes in. This is why we've been so focused on this as of this year, because we believe this to be like really one of the core missing points on the UX level for Web3 to kind of move past its prerequisite of having some sort of technical inclination to actually use the ecosystem, which today is very much true with the need to manually bridge and kind of manage bounces across chains and stuff like this. So this is quite a big problem that we've been trying to address with universal accounts and with kind of providing this smart account framework to give users one balance they can leverage across any application on any chain. So yeah, I think this conversation was great, and I think that the future of the space with chain abstraction is very exciting, and definitely looking forward to everybody here on the call. I think that everybody is building very solid solutions that, of course, we hope to kind of be directly compatible with and integrate pretty closely with. So yeah, I'm excited for this, and thanks for hosting, Andy and Robbie.
Of course. Britt, we'll go to you and then to Ankit and wrap up.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. I couldn't have said it better. I mean, following up from you three, you guys had a lot of good stuff to say on closing thoughts. It's good to be building in a space where even like competing narratives sometimes can be working together, which is an interesting thing. And like, it's a good sign of things to come. And we're pretty excited to be working with different pieces of or different layers of the cake, if you will. Our big focus right now is on providing like dApp tools and the settlement layer. So again, if any listeners out there are interested in any of those tools, please reach out to me, either on Twitter or Telegram. And just really excited about everybody who's here and what we're all building together.
Awesome.
Thanks a lot.
Britt.
Thanks a lot, Robbie. Thanks a lot, Robbie and Andy, for having me. Thanks for having this conversation. If anyone who's listening wants to join the Cake Working Group, hit me up. We'll get you added, and please join, share your thoughts, correct us. It's only together do we increase the size of the pie. And we will be releasing more details about One Balance soon, so look out for tweets from Frontier Research.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Let's abstract the chains.
Thanks for